What's up, everybody? We're back with part 2 of Kathleen Zellner's newest filing on behalf of Steven Avery in an attempt to get him an evidentiary hearing. And we're going to pick right up where we left off on part 1. I will link part 1 in the description below so that you can go view that if you're just viewing this one first. We're going to start off with Mr. Avery has pled sufficient facts to meet the prongs of the Denny test. The appellate court found that Steven Avery's new evidence could establish a direct connection between Bobby Dassey and the murder of Teresa Halbach, making him a viable Denny suspect. Specifically, the appellate court stated, as discussed below, we are not addressing Steven Avery's most recent filing to this court, which seeks to directly connect Bobby Dassey to Teresa Halbach's murder. If Avery wishes to raise that claim, he will need to bring a new motion. That motion would need to survive both ESCALONA-NARANJO scrutiny and be found to have merit, in which case the evidence presented might supply the missing direct connection. In that event, the CD evidence might become relevant to showing Dassey's motive and might bear on whether Dassey is or should have been a viable Denny suspect. We express no opinion on the merit of any such motion, as all such issues would be for the circuit court to decide in the first instance. A state's motive argument. The state devotes 36% of its entire argument, 14 of 38 pages, to motive, which is the least important of the 3 prongs of Denny in this case because of Steven Avery's new evidence of the direct connection of Bobby Dassey to the actual commission of the murder and planting of evidence to frame Steven Avery. Another 15% of the state's argument, 6 of 38 pages, is devoted to the opportunity prong. A mere 6.5%, 2.5 of 38 pages, is devoted to Steven Avery's powerful new evidence of Bobby Dassey's direct connection to Teresa Halbach's murder and planting forensic evidence to frame Steven Avery. As stated in the introduction, the state's allocation of its argument on the 3 Denny prongs to minimize the direct connection of opportunity evidence is a deliberate strategy to distract, mislead the fact that an evidentiary hearing must be held because Steven Avery has overcome the procedural bars and met the specific requirements to proceed to a hearing on his new evidence and Brady violations. As part of its strategy, the state attempts to impose an impossible burden on Steven Avery, not required by Wisconsin case law, to prove substantial certainty that Bobby had the motive to murder Teresa Halbach. Because the murder is never an element of any crime, the state needs to prove motive. Relevant evidence of motive is generally admissible regardless of weight. The same applies to evidence of a third party's motive. The defendant is not required to prove motive. Evidence of motive that would be admissible against a third party, where that third party, the defendant, is therefore admissible when offered by a defendant in conjunction with evidence of that third party's opportunity and direct connection. Here, Steven Avery has offered his motive evidence. Here, Mr. Avery has offered his motive evidence in conjunction with evidence of Bobby's opportunity and direct connection to Teresa Halbach's murder and the framing of Steven Avery. Mr. Avery's motive evidence is relevant regardless of the weight assigned to it by this court. The state does not dispute that viewing violent pornography could establish motive for a murder. Rather, the state claims that Dassey's pornography of young females being tortured, mutilated, and otherwise abused is simply too mundane, too vanilla, too boring, to predispose someone to commit a murder. The state opines as an expert without having a real expert on violent pornography that the searches for images of absurd and deceased young females are simply too dull and generic for concern. The state, in an effort to divert attention from the powerful new evidence of opportunity and a direct connection of Bobby Dassey to the murder of Teresa Halbach and planting evidence, claims that Steven Avery has failed to prove motive by failing to identify with substantial certainty the individual who performed these thousands of pornographic searches on the Dassey computer as if the burden of proof requires Steven Avery to produce a videotape of Bobby Dassey performing these searches. The state is imposing a burden of proof for motive that does not exist in Wisconsin law. The issue is whether the pornographic searches on the Dassey computer are relevant to motive, regardless of the weight of the motive of evidence. Whew. The state's strategy fails to consider that a new witness has established opportunity and a direct connection between Bobby Dassey and the murder of Teresa Halbach and the framing of Steven Avery. As the appellate court found, if the new direct connection evidence survives scrutiny, the motive evidence found in the CD might become relevant to showing Dassey's motive and might bear on whether Dassey is or should have been a viable Denny suspect. The state wants this court to believe that because some of the computer searches were done by someone else, Steven Avery's Denny argument fails. The state conveniently overlooks that no one else from the Dassey household has been identified as having possession of Teresa Halbach's vehicle after her disappearance. Mr. Avery's motive evidence must be evaluated in light of his new powerful evidence of direct connection and opportunity for Bobby Dassey to be the perpetrator of this crime and the one who framed Steven Avery. No bright lines can be drawn as to what constitutes a third-party direct connection to a crime. Rather, circuit courts must assess the evidence in conjunction with all other evidence to determine whether, under the totality of the circumstances, the evidence suggests that a third-party perpetrator actually committed the crime. Additionally, in its response, the state ignores well-established Wisconsin law that the court must assume the facts in the pleading to be true when determining the legal sufficiency of the pleading. At this juncture, the court must assume that Bobby was the primary user of the computer, as his brother Blaine has attested in his affidavit, and therefore it is highly likely that Bobby was conducting the searches for the pornography. Also, Bobby has been caught in a blatant lie about the location of the computer. He told the police the computer was in the living room when the crime scene footage showed that the computer was in his bedroom. Regardless of the dates and times of the searches, Bobby Dassey cannot be ruled out by the state as the individual who is conducting any of these searches for pornography, and his motive must be evaluated in light of his possession of Teresa Halbach's vehicle, which establishes his direct connection and opportunity to commit the actual murder of Teresa Halbach and to plant the forensic evidence used to frame Steven Avery. All right, that's where I'm going to leave part 2. I'm going to be right back with part 3. Let me know what you think of what has been talked about so far. Leave some comments below. I hope you're having a good day, and I'll see you again soon.